My name is Yusuf Rahmani, and the story I'm about to share with you changed everything I ever believed in. The day it happened, October 17th, 2015, was supposed to be like any other day in my life as a fighter. I was in a place called Al-Barqa, a small, broken town in northern Iraq, where my unit had been deployed for what we were told would be a cleansing mission. At the time, I didn't question what that meant. I didn't need to. I had already surrendered my soul to a cause I believed was holy, one that had been hammered into my head since I was a child. I grew up in Deir al-Zur, a dusty border town that felt like it had been forgotten by the world, except for the war. My father, Abdul Karim, was a respected man in our community, stern, disciplined, feared even, but the respect he earned didn't come from kindness. It came from conviction. He was a man who preached about jihad not just as duty, but as destiny. From as early as I can remember, he would sit me down in front of him with his worn Quran in one hand and tales of martyrdom on his tongue. Jannah is not for the cowards, he used to say. It is bought with blood. Those weren't just words. They were law in our house. I didn't grow up with cartoons or bedtime stories. I grew up with videos of so-called martyrs, funerals that felt more like celebrations, and verses recited over the sounds of gunfire. My older cousin Omar died in a suicide attack when I was 12, and the pride in my father's eyes that day made more of an impression on me than the grief in my aunt's. He said Omar had become a man in that moment, that he was in paradise now, walking alongside prophets and sipping from rivers of honey. That night, as I lay awake in our cramped apartment, I remember whispering a prayer. Not for safety. Not for peace. I prayed to be just like Omar. As a teenager, I joined a training camp not far from Mosul. It was run by men who smiled when they taught you to shoot and nodded in approval when you showed no hesitation in stabbing a dummy shaped like a soldier. But the real training wasn't in the weapons. It was in what they fed your heart. They taught us that love was weakness, that mercy was betrayal, and that we were chosen. They told us we were the sword of Allah, and that shedding blood for His name was not only right, it was required. I believed them. With everything in me, I believed them. My first mission came sooner than I expected. I remember standing in the back of a rusted pickup truck, clutching my rifle so tightly that my knuckles ached. The leader of our unit, a man named Abu Zaid, pointed toward a small village on the outskirts of the desert. "They're apostates," he said. "Enemies of God." I didn't know their names. I didn't know what they believed. I just knew what we were told: eliminate them all. I felt something inside me tighten, but I pushed it away. This was my test. This was my moment to prove I was worthy of paradise. We moved in just before dawn. The village was quiet, still sleeping. Women carrying water jugs froze when they saw us. Children scattered. One of them, a little boy with messy hair and no shoes, locked eyes with me. He couldn't have been more than 7. He didn't cry. He just stared, confused, innocent. Abu Zaid barked the command, and everything exploded into chaos. I shot my weapon, again and again. The sound echoed through the narrow alleys. Screams cut through the smoke. We set homes on fire. We dragged men from their beds. We justified it all in the name of Allah. But as the sun began to rise, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I walked through the ruins of that village with ash in my lungs and blood on my hands. I should have felt proud. That's what I told myself. That's what we were trained to feel. But all I could think about was that boy's eyes, how they never left mine. That night, for the first time in years, I couldn't sleep. I laid on the floor of our camp, my back against cold concrete, staring at the stars. The faces of the people we'd killed, especially the children, started to replay in my head like a broken film reel. I saw them when I closed my eyes. I saw them when I opened them. I told myself it was weakness. That doubt was the whisper of the enemy. But deep down, I knew something inside me had started to break. Still, I kept fighting. I buried those feelings beneath anger, discipline, and prayer. I went on mission after mission, losing parts of myself every time. The more I killed, the less I recognized the person I had once been. My father's voice stayed in my mind, repeating verses and promises, telling me that this was the only path to righteousness. But the fear in the eyes of the people we executed started haunting me more than the scriptures could silence. I felt like I was sinking into something I couldn't escape. A pit I had helped dig with my own hands. It all came to a head during a mission near the city of Tel al-Rahman. We were ambushed by opposition forces. Bullets screamed through the air. I remember the deafening sound of mortars, the heat of fire, the ground splitting open around me. Then, there was nothing. Just silence. I felt an intense pressure in my chest, then my entire body went numb. I looked down and saw blood pooling under me. My ears rang. My breath slowed. The sky above me started to fade into a strange, heavy darkness. I knew I was dying. As I lay there, fading, everything that had once felt important, my training, the promises of paradise, the voices of my commanders, began to dissolve. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, and what lay beyond it wasn't divine reward, it was fear. A fear deeper than anything I had ever felt. Not fear of pain, not fear of death, but fear of what waited for me after it. My body was still in that battlefield, bleeding into the dirt, but something inside me was moving, falling. It felt like I was being pulled downward into a place I couldn't see, yet somehow already knew. The darkness I entered wasn't like the absence of light, it was alive. Heavy. Pressing against me from every side. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then I started to hear them, screams. Endless, echoing screams of agony and terror, not around me but inside me, like they were stitched to my soul. I saw shadows, twisted and writhing. Figures I couldn't recognize, until I did. Some of them were people I had known. Fighters I had trained with. Leaders I had looked up to. They were here. And they were suffering. No rewards. No rivers of milk or honey. Just torment. I tried to scream, to ask why I was here, after everything I had done. For God. But no words came. Only the realization that everything I believed had been a lie. My life had been built on blood, and now I was reaping its harvest. The cries around me grew louder, and with them came faces I didn't want to see. Faces of the children from that village. The boy with the messy hair. The mother who shielded her baby when I raised my rifle. The man who begged before I pulled the trigger. They weren't just memories anymore. They were real, and they were here. That's when I saw it. A light. At first I thought it was fire, some new layer of punishment. But it wasn't. It didn't burn. It felt warm, pure. It moved toward me slowly, pushing back the darkness as it came. And then a figure emerged. A man. Dressed in white, with a presence that seemed too powerful to bear. I couldn't look at him directly, yet I couldn't turn away. His face radiated love. Not just kindness, but real, painful love. The kind that sees everything you've done and still doesn't turn away. He said my name. Yusuf. His voice was like wind and thunder at the same time, gentle and mighty. I knew instantly who he was. I had never studied him. I had never prayed to him. But somehow I knew. It was Jesus. The very name I had been taught to hate. The name I had believed was blasphemy. And yet there he was, in hell, standing in front of a man who had killed in the name of God. I couldn't understand why he was there. Why would he come to someone like me? I was a murderer, a terrorist. I had spent my life cursing his name, mocking his followers, condemning his cross. And yet Jesus stood there, unshaken by the horror that surrounded us. He didn't flinch. He didn't accuse. He looked at me not with rage, but with sorrow. His eyes were deep, like they could see every sin I had ever committed, and still, they didn't turn away. I expected wrath. I expected him to condemn me right there and leave me to burn. But he didn't. He stepped closer. Then he spoke. You were deceived, Yusuf. You followed lies that claimed to speak for God, but they spoke only death. I do not come to destroy but to save. Even now I offer you life. You must choose. His words didn't hit my ears, they hit my soul. I dropped to my knees, not because I was told to, not out of submission, but because for the first time in my life, I felt something I didn't think I deserved. Mercy. I began to cry, and I couldn't stop. Not just because of the pain or the fear, but because I realized I had spent my entire life chasing a lie, and now I was being offered truth. Jesus extended his hand to me. I was trembling. Every instinct told me I wasn't worthy to take it. But something inside me, something long buried, reached out. When our hands touched, everything around me began to change. The darkness started to lift. The screams faded. The heat vanished. I felt weight fall from my shoulders, the kind of weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. Guilt, shame, hatred, rage. All of it was being pulled from me. It was as if he was carrying it for me. Then I saw it. Behind Jesus, the darkness had given way to a light so bright I had to shield my eyes. But it wasn't blinding. It was beautiful. It was like stepping into color for the first time after living in black and white. Trees, rivers, and skies more vibrant than anything I had ever seen. And a peace, deep, soul-saturating peace, filled everything. I knew I didn't deserve to be there. But I also knew I had been invited. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what he had done. Jesus turned to me and said, "This is the life I offer you. Not one of violence, but one of peace. Not one earned by killing, but one given through grace. Follow me, and you will be free." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, weeping. I didn't need to say the words out loud. My heart had already surrendered. For the first time, I felt like I was home. Not just in a place, but in the arms of the one who made me. The one who loved me even when I hated him. The next thing I remember was the smell of antiseptic. I opened my eyes barely. Everything was blurry. There were tubes in my arms, machines beeping, and a dull ache running through my entire body. I was alive. Somehow, after all that, I had come back. I was in a hospital just outside of Erbil, in northern Iraq. One of our fighters had dragged me out before the building collapsed. The doctor said I shouldn't have survived. But I knew better. I knew why I was still breathing. Jesus had brought me back, not just to live, but to be changed. The days that followed were slow. My body healed, but my heart was raw. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Every time I opened them, I saw the damage I had done. I couldn't go back to that life. I wouldn't. But I also knew what leaving meant. People like me didn't walk away from the organization. Apostasy was punishable by death. I had seen it with my own eyes. Men who dared to question were executed without hesitation. And yet, something in me had shifted too deeply to ignore. I didn't care if it cost me my life. I had to get out. One night, with the help of a nurse who had overheard me mumbling the name of Jesus in my sleep, I slipped out of the hospital. She didn't say much, just pressed a small, tattered Bible into my hands and whispered, "Go." I didn't know where to go, but I knew I had to get away from everything I used to be. I crossed into Jordan under the cover of night, using forged documents and hiding in the back of a delivery truck. Every checkpoint felt like it would be my last. My heart pounded with every stop. But I made it. I ended up in Amman, a city I had once despised. It was a place I had thought of as weak, too tolerant, too westernized. But now, it was my sanctuary. I found shelter in a small church tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. I remember walking through its doors, still wearing the clothes I had nearly died in, holding that little Bible like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The pastor, Farid, didn't ask questions. He just looked at me and said, "You've come far. You're safe here." And in that moment, I finally let myself exhale. Over the next few weeks, I barely spoke. I sat in the back of the church, watching others sing songs I didn't know, pray prayers I didn't understand. But I listened. And I cried, a lot. I didn't know why at first, but now I believe it was because I was finally in a place where my soul could breathe. Nobody judged me. Nobody asked me to explain what I had done. And still, I could feel the weight of my past in every breath. The blood on my hands didn't just vanish because I had crossed the border or stepped inside a church. I had to face it. I had to bring it to the one who had shown me mercy in the darkest place imaginable. Pastor Farid came to me one evening after everyone had left. He sat beside me in the pew and gently asked, "Yusuf, do you want to be free?" My eyes filled with tears before I could even answer. I nodded. He opened his Bible and began to read from the Gospel of Luke, the story of the prodigal son. I'd never heard it before. And yet, somehow, it felt like it had been written just for me. A son who had wandered so far from home that he thought he was beyond forgiveness, only to find his father running toward him with open arms. I broke down right there in that little sanctuary, sobbing like a child. And Pastor Farid just prayed over me, asking God to receive me as his son. That night, I gave my life to Jesus. Not out of fear, not because of some emotional high, but because I had seen him. I had stood in his presence. I had heard his voice. And even when I was at my worst, he had not turned away. I was baptized a week later in a tiny courtyard behind the church, the sun rising just as I came up out of the water. I wish I could say everything changed instantly, that the guilt disappeared and I walked forward unburdened, but it didn't work like that. My past didn't disappear. But now I was walking with the one who had conquered it. For the first time, I didn't feel condemned, I felt forgiven. But even in peace, danger still followed me. The people I had once fought alongside found out I had defected, that I had converted. I started getting messages, veiled threats, warnings, pictures of me in public places. They had eyes everywhere. I was told there was a fatwa against me, that my life was forfeit. For a while, I lived in constant fear, sleeping in different places, moving from house to house. But one night, as I sat by myself with my Bible in my lap, I remembered what Jesus had told me in that place of darkness. "Follow me, and you will be free." And I realized, even if they killed me, they couldn't touch what mattered anymore. I was already free. That freedom became the fuel for a new mission, one I never saw coming. I started sharing my story, not publicly at first, but with small groups inside the church. Former Muslims, refugees, broken men who carried their own secrets, their own guilt. At first, I was afraid to speak. What if they hated me? What if they saw me as a monster? But something incredible happened. People listened. They didn't flinch. They didn't walk away. In my story, they saw parts of their own. And in my encounter with Jesus, they began to hope that maybe, just maybe, he could meet them too. Before long, I was invited to speak at refugee camps outside the city. At first, it was just a few tents, a few people. Then more. Word began to spread. There was a man who had seen hell, who had met Jesus there and come back changed. They didn't care that I used to be a fighter. They cared that I understood their pain. That I knew what it was to be angry at God, to believe the lies that lead men to violence, to feel too far gone for grace. And I didn't preach at them. I just told the truth. I told them what I had seen. And that was enough. I met a man named Hassan at one of those camps. He had been a recruiter for a jihadist group in Yemen. He was angry, suspicious, and dead inside, just like I had been. We talked for hours. He asked me the hard questions. How do you know you weren't just dreaming? Why would Jesus care about you? What kind of God forgives killers? I didn't argue with him. I just looked him in the eye and said, because I met him. And he loved me anyway. A week later, Hassan came to the church. He sat in the back, just like I used to. And when the invitation was given, he stood, tears running down his face. He gave his life to Christ that day. I'll never forget it. More stories followed. Men who had blood on their hands. Women who had lost everything to war. Children who had seen their parents murdered. And somehow, in the middle of all that devastation, Jesus kept showing up. I wasn't the savior. I was just a witness. A broken man with a new heart. There were times when the threats against me grew louder. People from my past sent videos, pictures, audio messages. They called me a traitor, a dog, an infidel. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't shake me. But every time I felt fear creeping back in, I'd go back to that moment in the dark, when Jesus reached out his hand and called me by name. Eventually, word of my testimony spread beyond Jordan. A Christian missionary group from Cyprus reached out to the church, asking if I would be willing to travel and speak to other ex-fighters who were in hiding. I hesitated at first. Traveling meant more exposure, more risk. But then I remembered why Jesus had brought me back. Not just to be saved, but to help lead others out of the same pit I had fallen into. I prayed for days, and when the peace came, it wasn't loud, it was still and deep. I said yes. I packed a small bag, kissed the church family goodbye, and left everything familiar behind. My first stop was in Nicosia, where I met a group of former radicals who had escaped death by inches. Some were missing limbs. Others carried invisible wounds that ran even deeper. They didn't trust me at first. They thought I was a plant, a spy. I understood. I would have thought the same. But as I shared my story, slowly, humbly, without drama, I saw something shift in the room. These men, hardened by years of violence, began to soften. I watched one of them, Sammy, weep for the first time in 2 decades. He told me later, I didn't think I was allowed to cry. But when you spoke, I saw myself. And I felt like God was letting me feel again. From there, the doors kept opening. Underground churches invited me to share. Secret gatherings of new believers asked me to speak. I traveled through Turkey, Lebanon, and parts of North Africa, always careful, always watching my back, but never once turning down a chance to tell the truth. The truth that no man is too far gone. That no amount of blood or violence or darkness can separate us from the love of God once we say yes to Him. That Jesus doesn't wait for us to be clean. He meets us in the filth and brings the cleansing Himself. And that even a man like me, who once lived for death, can now live for hope. I started wearing a simple wooden cross around my neck, not to flaunt, but to remind myself. Every time my fingers touched it, I remembered the cell in my soul I had lived in, and the light that shattered it. The cross used to represent weakness to me. A man dying on wood couldn't possibly be divine, I was told. But now I know that it represents the greatest power in the universe. Not power to destroy, but power to forgive. Power to love those the world considers unlovable. Power to restore the broken, the damned, the forgotten. People like me. Years have passed since that day in 2015 when I lay bleeding on the ground, ready to die in darkness. But not a day goes by that I don't remember it. Not because I'm haunted by it anymore, but because it reminds me of who rescued me, and why I'm still alive. I'm not the same man who once called death a reward. I don't wake up fueled by rage or ruled by fear. These days I wake up with purpose. Not a perfect one, I'm still learning, still healing, but a purpose that's rooted in love, in grace, in truth, and in a Savior who stepped into hell to pull me out. Some people ask if I regret it all, the years I spent in violence, the lives I destroyed, the faith I misplaced. My answer is complicated. Yes, I regret the pain I caused. I carry that sorrow with me. I wish I could go back and undo what I did. But I also know that Jesus has used my story to bring others out of their own darkness. He has taken what the enemy meant for evil and turned it into something powerful. Something life-giving. If my scars can help someone else see his light, then I won't hide them. I'll wear them like testimony. Not of who I was, but of who he is. I've shared my story in over 20 countries now. I've spoken to rooms filled with skeptics, radicals, pastors, politicians, even atheists. Some shake their heads. Some argue. But many lean in. And when they do, I look them in the eye and tell them, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm here to tell you what happened to mine. I tell them about the blood on my hands, and the grace that covered it. I tell them about the darkness I lived in, and the light that pierced through it. And I tell them about Jesus, the man I never thought I'd follow, the Savior I now can't live without. I don't fear death anymore. I used to. I used to think death was the beginning of glory. Then I learned it was the start of torment, unless it ends with Christ. Now I live not trying to die, but trying to love, trying to serve, trying to reach people who are lost like I was. And if someone comes for me, if those old enemies ever find me, I'll greet them with the same words Jesus gave me. You are not beyond redemption. Because if he could save me, a man who once lived for terror, he can save anyone. If you're watching this right now, and you feel like you're too far gone, listen to me, you're not. I don't care what you've done. Jesus already saw it. And he still chose to die for you. He still wants you. All you have to do is surrender. Call on his name. Ask him to show you the truth. And when you do, you won't just hear about grace, you'll experience it. Don't leave this video without doing something. If this story touched you, share it with someone. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if you need prayer, drop your name, we'll pray for you. Most of all, subscribe to the channel. We're sharing stories like this to bring hope into the darkest places. Let this be the moment your story begins.